Welcome to the NFN Radio News Podcast, brought to you by NotFakeNews.biz. I'm Bob Gaddy, editor and publisher of Not Fake News. Today we're welcoming Simon Chadwick, author of a book on American society and politics, and a management consultant based in Raleigh, North Carolina. Growing up in South Africa as the son of a prominent anti-apartheid activist, Simon has firsthand experience of living in a totalitarian society. He became familiar with the tactics employed by politicians to suppress opposition, large segments of the population, and engineer society to their own advantage. Simon's book offers a fascinating historical and cultural context and clear positive advice for how our country and government can move toward democracy. Welcome, Simon. Thanks for joining us today on the NFN Radio News Podcast.
It's a pleasure, Bob. Lovely to be here. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I have my first question for you, Simon. What was it like growing up as a white person in South Africa?
Intensely weird. You could grow up and live in South Africa as a white person and be completely, if you wanted to be, completely oblivious to what was going on around you. You had a life of privilege, a life of wealth. You were free to go anywhere, do anything that you wanted, apart from speak out against the government. But if you were aware of what was going on around you, it was profoundly disturbing. The black population was totally segregated from the white population. Indeed, any population different to the white population was segregated. So, for example, blacks would live in what were called townships, which were outside the cities. They could only come into the cities to work. They had to have what was called a pass, which is literally a passport to get into the cities. And if they were found outside of their hours in the wrong place, all hell would break loose. But it was beyond that. It was for my father and my mother. My father was a bishop, an Anglican bishop, and he was very prominent in the anti-apartheid movement. So our house was bugged, our car was bugged, our phones were bugged. We couldn't go anywhere without the secret police following us. We had the secret police parked in a supposedly unmarked car at the gate 24/7. And my mother, who was English, showed a very English form of defiance. She used to take him a cup of tea every morning.
So the secret police weren't so secret, I guess.
No, they weren't. They weren't very secret, and they weren't actually very good, but they were very brutal.
Oh.
And my father lost priests to murder while they were incarcerated. One fell out of a 7th-story floor in the secret police station whilst he was being interrogated. So it really depended on the degree to which you wanted to own up to what was going on around you, but it was hugely disturbing.
How long were you there? I mean, how old were you when you left South Africa?
The last time I was there, during that period, I was 26. I was already working in the UK, but I used to visit regularly. And when my father was first exiled and then imprisoned, I would act as his press agent in the UK, making sure that the papers didn't forget about him. And so it was, I was spending a good part of the year every year over there until my mid-20s.
What happened to your father ultimately?
He was exiled back to the UK. A certain lady called Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister at the time. She said she wasn't going to have any bloody communist as a bishop in her country. So basically, he then he went on to an excellent career as head of a spiritual movement, and then he became assistant bishop of Liverpool, one of the big cities in Britain, once Thatcher was out of power.
I see. So he was quite a quite a person, obviously. Yeah.
He was. When the BBC was doing a program on him after his death, they interviewed Desmond Tutu, who's a great friend of the family, and they said, "Was he?" They asked him, "Was he brave? Was Graham Chadwick brave?" He said, "Brave? He could have been killed at any time."
Wow. You must be incredibly proud of him.
I am.
Yeah.
I am.
As well, you should
He
be.
was a man that who combined faith and a passion for justice. They were indistinguishable.
I'm just wondering if there was anything about the administration of Donald Trump that reminded you of anything in South Africa.
To tell you the truth, Bob, that is why I wrote the book. And it's also why after nearly 30 years living in the country on a green card, I actually got citizenship. Because, I could have decided with my wife to just say to hell with it and go back to the UK. And a lot of our family wanted us to. But I lived here for so long, and all the red flags were flying. Not even before he became president, just during his campaign. He was deploying during the campaign the dictators or the wannabe dictators' standard mantra. Everything is carnage, a mess, a disaster. It's all the fault of insert your favorite group, where he was concerned it was Mexicans, Democrats, socialists, whatever. Only I can fix it, and then everything will be wonderful. He did that over and over and over and over again. And that is exactly what every wannabe dictator does. And it was the same even in South Africa, which had a whites only electorate. One party basically ruled, and they ruled by fear of other people, in this case, blacks, sometimes fear of communists. So I saw that, and then during the actual administration, you've founded Not Fake News. During the administration, the lies that were told, the degree to which lies were said that were patently obvious, and yet was said with an absolute straight face and promulgated with a straight face. This also is something I've seen time and again. I saw it in South Africa. I saw it when I was teaching in Kenya, when I was young and Jomo Kenyatta was in power. Even in political history, you see it. Think of Chavez in Venezuela. All of those who are dictators will eventually lose sight of the truth, obfuscate the truth, and downright lie.
Yeah. And it seemed like there was never going to be an end to that. To me, it did. He was a master and still is a master of turning things around backwards. In my opinion, He's the guy that created fake news to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, before he ever started talking about fake news, in my mind, when I listened to him, I used that term. He's creating fake news.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what he did. And then he turned that around and used that term against the legitimate news agencies in this country, around the world. He didn't like anybody that wasn't Fox or Breitbart or any of those.
And when they upset him, he'd turn on them really fast.
Yeah, that's the reason why I started Not Fake News, as like a little voice in the wilderness, but it was very satisfying to do, and now I've just continued it, and I try to bring a little light to what the Republicans are trying to do, and expand its base by talking with people like you. And I'm thrilled that you agreed to join us. because I greatly admire your background and that of your father. So I'll just say thank you right now for that.
Thank you.
One of the things that I've also been disturbed about, Simon, has been the role that money plays in politics. And it's gotten worse with the ability of corporations and super PACs to contribute practically unfettered and without disclosure as to the identity of where the money comes from in many cases. What are your thoughts about that?
I actually devote quite a large portion of the book to that because I completely agree with you. I think American politics has become corrupt to its very core. And that is due to the immense amounts of money, not only spent campaigning, the super PACs and the dark money, but also during an administration, the lobbying, the amount of money that flows from K Street. The the thing here is that what makes it even more scary is that those hundreds of millions, billions of dollars that flow into those PACs, as you said, you don't know who's behind it. But when you do scrape the surface, when you really scrape the surface and you go down to who is primarily financing them, it's less than 100 people.
Mm-hmm.
Less than 100 people are financing most of the money, most of the non-popularly raised money in politics.
Yeah.
And that is very scary indeed.
This has been going on forever. During the early part of my career, I worked on Capitol Hill as chief of staff for two different members of the House. One was a Republican and one was a Democrat. The first guy that I worked for was a Republican. And one day he asked me to go to lunch with a lobbyist from a major oil company who had invited him to lunch, and he couldn't go, so he asked me to go in his place. So I did. So I asked this guy what he was looking for. What was his objective? Why did he invite us to lunch? And the bottom line was my boss, the congressman, the Republican congressman, was a member of a committee that was in markup on a major piece of legislation that would have affected the oil industry. And so he reached in his pocket. This was in the Capitol Hill Club, right across the street from the Capitol. He reached in his pocket and he pulled out an envelope and he wanted to hand it to me. And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, I just want to show my appreciation to the congressman for his position on this legislation." And I said, "I'm sorry, I cannot accept that. That bill is in markup, and it would be totally inappropriate. If you want to contribute personally, you can contribute to our campaign later." So I went back to the office, and the congressman said to me, "What did he want?" I said, "He wanted to give you some money." He said, "Where's the check?"
Oh, God.
Yeah. I said, "I'm saving you from yourself. That's what you pay me for." And it wasn't long after that I went to work for the next guy whose name was Jim Florio, and who is a co-host on my podcast from time to time. And Jim Florio is totally opposite. He later became governor of New Jersey. Wonderful man. So
I thought I knew the name. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but no, money in politics is just a horrible thing, and I don't know what the solution is, but clearly, we can't really have a democracy as long as this continues. I don't think.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that other developed economies have ways and means of preventing this from happening. That's not to say there's not corruption in them. There is, but there are essentially three systems. One is that the you can't give money at all,
Right.
and that elections are completely state funded. A second is that you can collect as much money as you like, but you can only spend a certain amount.
Mm-hmm.
And the third is you are restricted on what you can collect, but you can spend what you like.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't actually have it.
Right.
And those are the systems in place in pretty much every other developed economy, developed society.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason why one of those should not be put into place here, except that you're asking turkeys to vote for Christmas.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what you're
Yeah.
doing. So,
And we've seen this now with HR1.
mm-hmm.
The fact that a bill which is very popular in the country is the right thing to do has passed the House, and the Senate Republicans are refusing to take it up because they know that if that was taken up, they would be out of power for some considerable time.
Which is why the Republican states continue to push all of these individual pieces of legislation to restrict voting.
Yeah. Well, you're in South Carolina. I'm in North Carolina. Two of the most erudite states in terms of being able to gerrymander and restrict the vote.
Mm-hmm.
They've both got long histories of that. But you're right. Until we can solve that, and I don't know, it may take a generational change for it to happen.
Yeah. Now we need to take a quick break here, but when we come back, we'll talk with Simon Chadwick about his views of the Republican Party and where they're at today with the influence of Donald Trump. We have an interesting debate, I guess you could say, going on right now. We had a Republican administration in Trump. And traditionally, Republicans were for smaller government. Of course, Trump kind of turned that on its head with the way he was. But nevertheless, that has always been the tradition of the Republican Party. Now, with Biden in power, he's looking to the government as the solution to many major problems that we have in this country, everything from the environment to transportation to COVID relief and so on. What's your view about the proper role of the government in terms of dealing with issues of public importance?
Well, if you look at it from a high level, I guess you can say that there is a social contract between government and the government, which basically is, if you pay taxes and obey reasonable laws, we'll make sure that you're secure, physiologically, physically, economically, that you get good education, good health. That's what social democracy basically rests on. If you want to take a more cynical view, there's a great book which came out a few years ago called The Dictator's Handbook. And it makes the point that there are three groups, concentric circles, if you like, in terms of getting someone to power. The first is what is called the nominal selectorate, everybody who is eligible to vote. The next one is the actual selectorate. They're the people who do vote or can vote. And then there's the winning coalition in the center. The people behind you, the money, the influencers, and the voters. And they make the point that the authors make the point that it doesn't matter who you are as a politician. When you get into power, you have to pay the winning coalition to stay in power and to be re-elected, right, or to stay in power. if you're a dictator, that winning coalition is very, very small. So you pay it out in cash and in kind.
Right.
But if you are a Democrat in a functioning democracy, that winning coalition is much bigger. So you pay it out in public goods,
mm-hmm.
in health and infrastructure and education and so on.
Mm-hmm.
That's a cynical view.
Mm-hmm.
I think Biden is. It's interesting because from about the 1920s through, so it's certainly from when FDR came to power, and possibly Teddy Roosevelt before him, but after, from FDR onwards, right up until Reagan, there was an agreement in this country that government was to be used for good. The government had a role to play. And that agreement basically ended when Reagan came to power. And it's been that way now for 40 years. What Biden is trying to do is to swing the pendulum back. And whether he can do so or not remains to be seen. I mean, the Republicans are going to fight him every inch of the way.
Yeah, much depends on the 2022 elections and mm-hmm. how well the Democrats can fend off the Republicans' effort to take over both the House and the Senate. And my feeling is if the Republicans succeed in that, Biden is going to be in for a very, very tough time, and so is the country.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. The thing that I was trying to do when I wrote the book For the People was to understand how we had got into such a mess and why we were teetering on authoritarianism. Because we came really, really close, and we're not out of the woods yet. But so I decided to look at it through the lens of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if going back to your earlier question, you could say that the function of government is to provide security, to provide mm-hmm. safety, mm-hmm. and that means at the very bottom level that you've got housing, you've got clean water, you've got food. The next level would be that you can wander the streets and not be afraid of getting mugged or killed. That you have a job. That you have education for your kids, mm-hmm. and the more I looked, the more the U.S. was massively underperforming on all these basic levels, massively, and its legacy, it's a legacy from long, long ago, pre-Civil War. And you have to ask yourself the question, how does the richest country in the world get to be so underperforming in these areas? We are in education, we're 35th in terms of math.
Oh, I know, it is terrible.
How does that work?
Yeah.
In healthcare, we spend twice what our competitors do, and yet we have worse outcomes.
Right.
How does that work?
Right.
So I was looking at it through those lenses, and then I was looking to what I called democratic libertarian countries like a lot of Scandinavia and New Zealand and so on, and looking at what they've done that has actually made them very successful in that respect.
Right.
And there's also, just to round that thought off, there is another cultural thing I think that is getting in the way, which is that the US is constantly striving or in strife between individualism, small government, versus what people here stupidly call socialism, but government as a solution to the problem, and an orientation towards community, towards society. And that was another thing that Reagan did, along with Thatcher. They declared there was no such thing as society. That it was individuals that counted. Mm-hmm. Now, if you look at all these countries like, Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands, New Zealand, they're all very heavily community-minded. The population, the culture is community and society-minded. Government is seen as a way to level the playing field for everybody, to provide that security framework. And the fascinating thing about that, Bob, is that not only are these countries some of the richest in the world, they're also some of the happiest.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that'll tell you something. There's another area that I think we need to talk about, and that is race.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about, the situation that you experienced growing up in South Africa during apartheid. But here in this country, the original sin of slavery is still with us in many ways. And we've seen that play out in these killings that have occurred, the George Floyd murder, etc. But beyond that, the deep-seated racism that still exists among many here in America. What are your thoughts about that in the context of your background, where you come from, this past administration? We're looking forward to, Juneteenth, the day that is important in the African American community. What are your thoughts?
First of all, you're absolutely right. The legacy of slavery exists. And you can see it just in the numbers. The pre-pandemic, the average white household net worth was $193,000. The average black household's net worth was $26,000. And that went down dramatically during the pandemic. And you see it in every single aspect of society. But, the interesting thing for me, and the horrifying one, is that when I traveled the Deep South here, and I've done so frequently, the parallels with South Africa during apartheid are horrific. They're absolutely horrific. Not only the poverty that you see, amongst the black population in places in Mississippi, southern Arkansas, places like that, but also the repression. The repression of the vote in Mississippi, the lack of giving a shit on the part of politicians. 26% of the population in Mississippi goes hungry every day. Could you be governor of a state in which a quarter of your people go hungry every day? And I'll give you an example of how it really creeped me out. So in South Africa, in the 80s, 70s and 80s, every white person, actually everybody, was church going. And so they'd go to church, they'd get, particularly the whites, they'd get up in their finery, they'd go to church on Sunday. And then after church, they would go to a restaurant and eat. And that restaurant would be a whites-only restaurant. Right. That was the law. And except for the servers, who were all black.
Right.
So my wife and I were in Mississippi for a funeral a few years ago, not that long ago, probably 5 years. And we were in a major town in Mississippi on a Sunday. And, we asked somebody, where do you go for lunch on a Sunday? And they said, oh, you go to this place. It's a wonderful place. We got in there and it was identical. All these white families dressed up to the nines, trying to be nice to one another. You could tell that they hated each other's guts, but anyway, they were trying to be nice to one another. Not a black face at any table, but all the servers were black. It was like South Africa in the 1970s.
My goodness. And
in this particular city in which we were visiting, the last segregated public water fountain, was only cleared out in 1985.
My goodness.
So the parallels are really, really horrific. The racism is parallel. And, I think it just makes my blood boil, frankly. Um, uh, and there is a much greater awareness of this, and I think the younger generation, particularly kids, Gen Z, I think probably um, are going to see a lot of changes, probably be responsible for a lot of changes in the way in which the races get along together. But um, it's like I'm living back in those days again.
Do you feel like it was made worse in the aftermath of the presidency of Donald Trump?
Yes, yeah. I mean, because when he came down the staircase in Trump Tower, the group he inserted in that line, "It's all the fault of," was Mexicans. The group that he started to insert in that line during his presidency, through dog whistling, through policies, and sometimes straight out,
Mm-hmm.
was blacks.
Mm-hmm.
And the race card was played particularly effectively, I think. Um, you have to ask yourself why 37% of this country still would vote for him, and it's because he has used that old trope of otherizing people, preying on insecurities, blaming others, in this case blacks or Mexicans or whoever it may be, and dividing the population. It is the oldest game in the book, and he played it to the very end.
Yeah, he did. It occurred to me during that period of time uh, of his presidency when I saw the racial unrest that occurred, and not just the racial unrest, but when I moved to South Carolina, I started playing softball with a bunch of guys my age. Uh, and so, to those who can't see me, that means 65 and over. Okay. So, a bunch of old goats were out there playing softball. But we're standing around the dugout one day. It was the day after Trump was elected. And I overheard a conversation among South Carolinians who have been here for a long time. And one man said to another, "Well, now we can say and we can do just about anything we want."
Mm-hmm.
And that was in a racial context.
Mm-hmm.
And that I've never forgotten that conversation. And quite frankly, I don't play softball with those guys anymore because I just can't stand the attitudes. But uh, it occurred to me that, a lot of us thought that the election of Barack Obama would do a lot to improve race relations in this country. I think what it did in one way was to awaken the latent hatred against blacks and other minorities. And then when Trump was elected, he was elected, I think, largely because of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then it became okay, like that guy said, we can say anything and we can do anything now because our guy's in charge.
Yeah, and that's so true. I think it gave a lot of people permission when Obama was elected to say, "You see, we've done it. We've broken racism doesn't exist anymore. We've got a black president," and for other people
Yeah,
to nurture their resentment.
yeah.
And it's interesting because when you look at the heartland of Trump support, and it's the heartland, but it's by no means his only areas of support. So much of it came out of the Midwest, out of Kentucky, out of West Virginia, places which had been ravished by offshoring or automation or whatever, and governments hadn't really paid much attention. And I think a lot of the
Mhm.
populations in those areas, the white populations, felt hugely resentful that now there was a black guy in the White House, and still nobody was paying attention to them, and nobody's going to pay attention to them. And Trump stoked that. He really stoked that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, he did. And, I think the fact that Obama is such a well-spoken individual, highly educated, extremely intelligent, made many of those people who Hillary Clinton mistakenly called the deplorables actually feel that way. And so anyway, let's talk about something positive. What do you see that's on the bright side that we can close up with?
Well, somebody once said to me not very long ago, you're an eternal optimist. And I said, yeah, I'm an eternal optimist with periods of sheer panic. But I am optimistic that societies such as this do somehow come through in the end. I think there is a lot more attention being paid these days as a result of the previous administration. I think, one of the things that was phenomenal was in the last election was black turnout. Young turnout was up as well. And however much the Republicans try to suppress the vote, I don't think they can succeed against either of those populations.
Yeah.
The will is too great right now. And what we've got to keep going is that will and that organization. They showed in Georgia just what great organization does. And the longer that we fight, and the longer that there is this awareness of what the other side is trying to do, I do think that there is a chance for reversing the tide. I did an analysis some time back on every single administration that this country has seen since independence. 60% of them have tended towards the authoritarian and the individual and concentration of power in small groups. 40% usually elected because of a crisis have tried to turn it towards government, community, society. We're in one of those periods right now, and maybe we can, maybe we can make that stick.
Okay. Now, your book, real quick.
So it's entitled For the People, A Citizen's Manifesto to Shaping Our Nation's Future. As I said earlier, it looks at politics and society through the lens of Maslow. And it is a manifesto. It looks all around the world at how people do things and how they succeed at things that we are perhaps not succeeding at. And it suggests a way in all areas, education, the economy, voting, money in politics, any of those areas, social security, drugs, ways in which we can actually change course without actually having to have a revolution as such, but small things that can be done that can change our course. The Biden administration is doing a lot of what I suggested in the book. I can't claim credit for that, but I do know they had the book in the campaign. If even a few of those things get passed through, we'll be in a better place. But so that's what the book is about. It's on its second edition. You can get it at Amazon and at bnn.com. And I hope a lot of people will read it and leave a review.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. It's been great talking to you today. We learned a lot, and I just frankly enjoyed it very much, and I appreciate you taking the time.
I really appreciate it. I enjoyed it too, Bob. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, we need to take a little pause here, but don't go away. I'll be right back with some closing comments. Thanks, guys, for listening. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and you'll come back on a regular basis. For longtime listeners, you know that we provide narrations of commentary published almost every day on notfakenews.biz. But we've expanded our offering to include newsmaker interviews, and we're going beyond the world of politics for those presenting guests and topics that I hope you find interesting and enlightening. In fact, right now we're streaming some episodes about Dave Fleischer, who's embarked on a 15,000-mile journey across the United States in honor of his daughter who passed away from a rare cancer, cholangiocarcinoma. Dave's visiting with many who have been affected by this disease as he stops at some 18 communities named Hope. So we're now streaming an updated report with Dave as he reports in from his first week on the road exclusively to NFN Radio News. And we'll have an updated report from Dave on his second week on his trip, streaming on Friday. That's just another reason for you to follow NFN Radio News and not miss an episode. You never know who'll be showing up. Now check out notfakenews.biz too, where you'll find new material just about every day by some excellent writers with perspectives on a whole range of topics. You can sign up as a member at notfakenews.biz. And of course, it's all free. Also, let your friends know about this podcast and about notfakenews.biz. Our goal is to be informative and entertaining as we comment on the latest developments in the news with just a little lean to the left. Now, this is Bob Gaddy signing off for NFN Radio News and notfakenews.biz.